Well, welcome to Dear Healthcare Provider, the podcast where patients, providers, and policymakers meet to have purposeful conversations about health and the issues that impact access to care and health outcomes. And today, my guest is my wonderful, fabulous, awesome, smart, bright, creative producer, Mr. Robert Ginyard.
Oh, Michelle, thank you so much for that introduction. I feel kind of strange on this side because I should be introducing you, but I thank you for that wonderful introduction. And you and I were talking about this episode as we always talk about the upcoming episodes and what we want to do with the show. And to let our audiences know, we have these production meetings that kind of start from a text, and then we get tired of texting one another, and then we wind up calling each other. And so we were talking about the show, and we've been excited about it, and we thought about the order of the show, and we have some spectacular guests that are going to be on the show. And I said, Michelle, I said, but people need to get to know you. How about we do an episode talking about you and your passion and your work and the reason behind the podcast. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's why we're here, because, again, we wanted to put out some fantastic episodes, but we wanted to give you kind of a background on Michelle, who she is, where she's been, what she's doing, and how I think that you're going to love what she's going to be presenting to you. So, Michelle, did I set that up correctly?
You did an awesome job, as usual. You did an awesome job. I think you're giving our listeners a little sneak behind the curtain of what happens between you and I as we've been creating this podcast.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
It's been fun. And can I also tell our listeners that, sometimes we start off with our meeting notes and we'll bounce something that's not in the notes off one another. And the next thing you know, 20 minutes has gone by and we have to circle back around to get to the agenda. But I will say this, those side conversations are so beneficial, because then when we do come back to the agenda notes, we've already have it figured out. So I thank you for that. You keep my creative juices running.
Well, yay. We help each other, friend. We help each other.
Well, okay, so I'm not going to hold our listeners up anymore. I'm going to go ahead and start this, Michelle. First of all, I want to say congrats for, I guess, dealing with me through this process to get the podcast up and running. But congratulations to you, because you really did put in some work to make this happen with your speaking. And a lot of times you're called away to do speaking engagements, panel workshops. And so I appreciate you making the time to really see this come to fruition. So congrats on the episode, or the podcast, I should say. And I'm going to ask you, give us a little sneak peek about your show. What's it called? What do you aim to do with the episode? And how will it benefit our listeners?
Wow. Thank you so much, Robert. Yeah, it really is a lot more work than I thought it was going to be. But, that's anything good, as my parents would say, anything worthwhile requires a little bit of blood, sweat, and tears. So I'm here for all of it. Yes, I'm here for all of it. But, Dear Healthcare Provider was birthed because, as you know, and actually the way you and I met, right? We're health advocates. And so as I've been doing this work, because of my history with living with the chronic disease of obesity, I really was starting to see some gaps in terms of the information that's out there, in terms of how patients like myself, I have the luxury of sitting on both sides because I'm also a nurse, but I think that what I was seeing in my own advocacy and in this space is that there needs to be more spaces like this that will allow policymakers, patients, and providers to have these meaningful conversations around health, healthcare access, and really ultimately health outcomes. And so I just happen to be now I'm a obesity subject matter expert. So I'm not sure how I got that title, but it's, that's how people know me in these streets, in these healthcare streets. But I
Yes.
feel like it's sometimes it's when you have a struggle and what you're going through, it really inspires you to want to do something for other folks so that maybe somebody coming behind you will have a little easier time than what you've had in terms of trying to
Yes.
navigate something. And I'm sure you
Yeah.
can attest to this even with your own health journey and your story and your podcast, is that that's what the inspiration is really it becomes less about you and more about wanting other people to be able to receive whatever it is that
Yes.
maybe you didn't along your journey. So
You know,
that's
and
how
it's really
Dear
about,
Healthcare Provider. I'm sorry, that's how Dear
yeah, and
Healthcare Provider has come about.
well, and one of the things that I remember you mentioning some time ago is that through the podcast and your advocacy efforts, you really were trying to help people so that they're never really starting from square one, because
Yes.
you've been there, you've done it, and you can offer advice as to how to navigate those particular journeys. I want to back up for just a second, because Dear Healthcare Provider just rolled off of your tongue when you just did this introduction. And I'd like to go back and ask you, how did you come up with the title of the show? And what did it mean to you when you said, okay, this is it, this is the title, and how does it resonate with you? But how do you think that will resonate with the audience?
Wow, that's such a good question, and thank you for asking it because it really makes me think like deeply. Why did that resonate with me? It resonated with me because my own personal experience in trying to seek appropriate care for my obesity, I kissed a lot of healthcare provider frogs, and what I mean
Okay. Yes. Yeah. What I mean, please explain that.
I mean, you go to the doctors, and when you live with something like obesity, because that's what this first season is focused on, as our listeners will learn, and we'll tell more about that as we go along in this episode. But when you live with obesity, everybody thinks that the simple answer is that you need to eat less and you need to
Yes.
exercise more, and that actually is going to solve all of your problems. Well,
Yes.
the obesity epidemic, as I checked last, was something like close to 50% of the population is living with the disease of obesity. And if it was that simple, we would have eradicated this by now. And
Michelle, 50%.
yes, close to
Wow.
50%. Yes,
Wow.
close to 50%
Wow.
of the population is living with obesity. So, this is if it was as simple as eating less with all of the diet culture, a bajillion diets out there, and I've tried probably every last one of them. Okay. All right. If it was that simple, if it was that easy,
Yeah.
we wouldn't have this issue, and I probably wouldn't have this podcast. And
Wow.
so, when I thought about Dear Healthcare Provider, as I was navigating and feeling unseen at times, unheard, judged, the bias, all of the things,
Yeah.
I was like, what do I want healthcare providers to know? And then that expanded to, well, okay, if we're having a conversation, that's got to be two-way or three-way. And a lot of the issues that we are facing in terms of healthcare has to do with sometimes aware healthcare providers around what the disease of obesity is and isn't. It has to do with
Yes.
policies that prevent people, like structural policies that prevent people from getting healthy foods, the economics of that, living in food deserts, not living in safe neighborhoods. Those are all things that are driven by policies. And then, of course, bringing the providers and the patients together to be able to talk about their lived experience. And I don't want to
Yes.
throw all healthcare providers under the bus. I mean, I kissed a lot of frogs, and I'm sure people listening will be like, yeah, I did too. Kissed a lot of frogs. I'm kissing one right now. But I don't want to throw them all under the bus because some,
Yeah,
in all fairness, I know when I was in nursing school, we didn't talk about this as a disease, and it was just declared a disease in 2013. So I'm going to say that we'd have to unlearn some things in the healthcare space and relearn some things in terms of really connecting with patients and understanding their stories and their lived experience and designing interventions that are going to honor the individual based on what they have or don't have access to. It's like I can
yeah,
tell somebody to get out and walk. And I'm not saying that, you've got to have good nutrition. You've got to be able to exercise, medications. We'll get into all of that. And some of our lovely guests, as you know, are talking all about that in the upcoming
sure.
episodes. But what if I live in a neighborhood where like I can hear gunshots at night? Am I going
Yeah.
to go out and take a walk because the doctor told me to? Probably not.
Mm,
What if
yeah,
I don't have
yeah.
a grocery store? What if all I have is the corner store and they sell Skittles and chips and M&Ms, and you're telling me I should eat more fruits and vegetables? Do you know what I'm saying?
And
So
and those items that you just mentioned are staples in some communities. That's what
absolutely.
those stores have.
That's what they have.
Yeah,
That's what they have. And so, and maybe I don't have a car to go to, 5, 6 miles away. I might even
yeah,
have bus money. I don't know. But I'm just simply saying that I feel like if we're going to address this issue, as well as other chronic diseases that we're out here advocating for and saying, well, people need to do this and people need to do that. If we're not willing to look at the issues underneath the issues and come and have meaningful conversations like this in a space where we're not arguing, but we're really trying to get an understanding of one another and what everybody is against, we're never going to make
yeah.
headway. So that is why I created Dear Healthcare Provider. And so, I'm excited about this opportunity, and I really believe that it's going to make a difference in the space, in the health advocacy space.
Well, when you mentioned the title, it just reminded me, when after you've shared your journey with me, I mean, I just kind of envisioned you sitting down and crafting a letter, and that first sentence there was "Dear Healthcare Provider." And from what you
Yes.
shared with me, then you go on to talk about your journey, and of course how you want to help others. And so with that, now you've got plenty of different avenues. Again, you speak and you're on panels a lot. What was it about choosing a podcast that you thought maybe that's the best vehicle to get your message out? Tell me about that.
Yeah. Other than the fact that I'm a frustrated Oprah.
Okay, all right, okay. We're being honest here.
that I want to be able to do this and talk with people and bring issues to the public eye
Yeah,
and really make a difference.
yeah,
I think that's really part of why I feel like a podcast is the way. And plus, I mean, podcasts oftentimes, I don't know about you, Robert, but I'm both visual and I am verbal, right? And so
yes, same here.
reason that's important to know is that the way I learn and the way I take in information, those are my primary ways. So I was like, okay,
Yes,
so, it works for me. And I think it probably works for a whole lot of other people. So you can sit down and watch it, you can listen to it. But I always want to be able to provide a venue where people can get quality information and they can decide what they want to do with it. But for me, this
yes,
seems like the perfect venue because, like I said, I'm totally verbal and visual, hence a podcast.
yes. Well, let's dive into that a little bit because having gotten to know you over the past couple of years, your vibe and your energy, um, this suits you. So I'm going to tie that in a little bit to your your healthcare journey in terms of your struggle with obesity. Was your voice kind of silenced because you were dealing with the weight at some point? Did you feel like, wow, if I lost, I don't know, 10, 20 pounds, then I could really let the world know that I'm Michele Tedder. To me, just from what I've seen and gotten to know you over the years, weight didn't matter. You were going to let folks know who Michele Tedder is anyway. But has the loss of that fueled this of that weight, fueled this passion to energize, inform other people, inspire them? Have you found that to be the case?
Yeah. I think, Robert, for me, you're absolutely right. My this personality's big. So
Yeah.
it didn't just get this way. It's
Okay,
always
right.
didn't get this. But
Okay.
here's what I can say about, as you were talking about that, I was thinking, I always thought it was my fault. That
Mm,
was the issue as I would go, but I knew something was off. I knew something was wrong because I'm like, I was doing all of the things that traditional diet culture says you should do. I was
yeah.
reducing my calories. I was working out. I had been to multiple healthcare providers. I had enlisted trainers. I had done everything. And so A plus B was supposed to equal C. It was
Yes.
not. Okay.
Mm.
It's like I might lose some weight, but then the weight would come back with a few more friends. And so the cycle was going on. And I
Yes.
kept,
It's
I
those
kept
darn friends.
those darn friends. Right. Exactly. It's like you were not invited to the
Right.
party.
Exactly. I said +1, not +5.
Exactly. Right. And I would say to people, to providers, I'm doing all the things. I've been on this diet, I've been in this program, it's not working. Like I'm not,
Yes.
and people look at you like, sure.
Right.
Like,
Right.
sure. So I think
Uh-huh.
that was more what I was dealing with, was that like they don't believe like what I'm saying, like that it's not, that I couldn't possibly be doing all of these things and still be this large, and the scale still
Yeah.
not move, or the scale move minimally. And so I think that when I finally found a provider who was able to say, "Hey, you're right. This isn't your fault. This is a
Mm.
disease. And all these things that
Yeah.
you're doing, you need more tools in your toolbox, because this is beyond you. This isn't about you and what you're doing and what you're not doing." So I think really when I think about that and how many millions of people who haven't found that provider that I found, right, who could
Yeah.
say, "Michele, you're not crazy. This isn't your fault. It's like this is something beyond you, and we have to figure it out together. This is a medical issue, and this is what's happening," right? That's what
Yeah.
fuels me, because I don't want other people to keep feeling the shame and the blame that I felt whenever I didn't acknowledge that. And now, mind you, I'm a healthcare person. I'm a nurse,
Exactly.
well
You're a
trained,
nurse. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and I still believed the hype. I did. I was like, well, you ought to be
Wow.
able to figure this out. You ought to be able to lose this weight. Why can't you lose this weight? Then it's like, okay, well, let me just exercise more. Let me hire another trainer. Let me read another book. Let me do. And it's like, it was none of that. It wasn't until I had weight loss surgery, which that was a long journey. And we'll talk about that, I'm sure, more as we, continue to do this podcast. But my point is, it was that healthcare provider
Mm-hmm.
who saw me, validated me, and educated me to change my mindset. And so
And
that's
what
what I
was that
want.
like? After
Oh
that
my
that
God.
consult, what was the rest of that day like when you were able to take that off your shoulders? What was the rest of that day like? What was the rest of that week like? Or rest of your life like, knowing that it is not me?
Talk about weight. It felt like the weight that I finally did lose when weight loss surgery was lifted off my shoulders. Because really, I mean, Robert, I did. I really felt that it was my fault. I was doing something wrong. I must be doing something wrong.
Yeah.
You got to be doing something wrong. I mean, it was really life changing. One, to know that I wasn't crazy, because I was starting to think, like, I think maybe I'm not doing what people, maybe it is what they're saying.
Yeah.
Right. And so you get
Yeah.
this like crazy, cognitive stuff going on. And so, I mean, to have someone say, it is not your fault, it is because this is a disease, was life changing. It was like a weight was lifted off, and I had hope again. I was like, okay,
Mm.
maybe there's some
Wow.
other options. Maybe there's something else that I can do. Maybe there's something
Yes.
else that will help me to finally get to the health that I'm really looking for. That's what it did. That's what that did for me.
Michelle, okay, so at that point when you found out that, hey, look, this is a disease, how was knowing that, did that give you ammunition to tell folks that maybe that thought you weren't doing all the things that you should do, and maybe you could go to some people who was thin as a pencil and say, aha, it's not me, it's a disease. Did that information provide you with that confidence to say, I'm good. It just wasn't me all these years.
Yeah.
How did that affect you in terms of communicating with others to say, it wasn't a behavioral thing?
Hmm.
How was that to be able to share something concrete with them to say, look, it just wasn't about me not doing an extra set of push-ups or
Yeah.
another lap around the track.
Yeah. I think it was that conversation was revolutionary in terms of my own personal internal bias. That was the first
Uh,
step, right? And then, but what you're talking about, it came over time as I embarked upon the journey, because what I haven't shared with you, or I think I've shared with you in private, is that prior to her having that conversation with me, and quite frankly, really asking me to please consider weight loss surgery, that was the same conversation. Prior to
mhm.
that, I had had a physician who also struggled with his weight. And so when I saw him, and this was prior to me meeting the physician who, honestly, she's still one of my like angels in my
Uh,
life. But he was having weight loss surgery, and it was early on when weight loss surgery, at least in Pittsburgh, which is where I'm located, they were only doing the full bypass, and they were doing the band. That was all. They weren't
yes.
doing the sleeve at that time in Pittsburgh. And so anyway, I saw him, and in the last visit in which I saw him, he disclosed to me that he was having a lot of health issues, and that he had made the decision that he was going to have gastric bypass surgery. He
Mm.
told me that. And so
Wow.
we talked about it, and he had all the comorbidities. He was struggling with his blood pressure, his joints. I think he had type 2. He had a lot of the comorbidities that come along with obesity. And so
Hmm.
he said that he felt like in order to improve the quality of his life, this was a decision that he was going to make. And so at that point, um, I had explored the possibility of getting the band, but the band, I was learning from people, because I always do my research. The
Yes.
band was
Yes.
not giving people the success that they wanted. And some people were actually having some complications that I had talked to
Okay.
and met. And I said, I don't think it's for me. But at any rate, this particular physician had made the decision to do the full bypass for himself. And the last thing he said to me before I left his office was, Michelle, I'll let you know how it goes. And I said, that's
Mm.
great. I wished him well, and said, I look forward to hearing about it. And so he had the surgery, and probably about a month or so after the surgery, he died. He
Mm.
died of complications.
Complicated. Hmm.
And so now, fast forward, by the time I found my other physician, that was in the back of my mind. And I was like,
Yeah.
well, the last thing he said to me was, he let me know. He let me know. He
Wow.
died. So that I was holding that as well. And so when my new physician, when she had that conversation with me, I disclosed that to her. And she was also able to have the empathy to say, Michele, she's like, I know you're scared, but they've made a lot of advances. And I believe that this could be something that could help you. If you get the information, if you make a different decision, that's fine too. So she empowered me. And
Yes.
that is such a high value to me when I talk about healthcare providers, what I want them to hear. And I love the visual you just painted earlier about writing a letter. If I was writing a letter, I would say to my healthcare provider, listen, I am more than my BMI. I am more than pushing back from the table. I am more than doing another lap around a track. Like, I'm a
Yeah.
person, and there's multiple things that may be influencing my decisions around my health. And I need you as a partner. I need you as a partner. I need you to see me. I need you to affirm me. And I need you to
Yeah.
collaborate and work with me. And so
I love that.
that's why
I love the
I'm doing
partnership
this.
piece of this. Well,
Hmm.
I've got to tell you that, working with you as being a part of the show, uh, I discovered some of my own weight bias, Michele. Now I'm on the thin side,
Yes.
and I also carried that weight, if you will, of not being thick enough.
Mm.
When I was growing up, I think I shared with you a lot of times I'd read my comic books and I'd go to the last couple of pages of the comic book, and you'd see the buff guy on the beach that's kicking sand on the thin guy, and the thin guy then he sends away for this muscle building package to bulk up. But I felt the same way when I was growing up. I was the thin guy.
Yeah.
You get the comments like, "Oh, you must run track," or you'd be a great basketball player. And so a lot of times, well, the game of basketball has changed now. I mean, there's not many thin guys playing now. I mean, these guys look like they could play football and basketball. But
Yes,
back
indeed.
then, back then it was just like if you were thin, you automatically you run track or you play basketball. And so I do recall, you know, becoming aware of my own weight bias.
Hmm.
That in certain circles, I felt like, quite frankly, I felt like I was overweight, if you will. Like the way somebody would look at somebody overweight, it's like I'm an underweight. And so,
Mm.
yeah, oh yeah. I mean, so working on the show has brought that out because that was that was something I was putting myself through and not necessarily how
Yes.
other people were seeing me. And so
Yes.
as we've done a few of these episodes, I've noticed that that is something that is talked about in each of the conversations. It's about the mindset and being
Yes.
able to shift that. And I say that to say because I would love for you to share the story or the episode of when you did lose the weight, Michele. You
Hmm.
still didn't recognize the new Michele in the mirror. Talk
Oh
about
yeah.
that a little bit.
Oh yeah. I still struggle. I still struggle.
Mm.
But
Mhm.
yes, well, you and I have had a lot of conversations about this.
We sure have.
We- We've had a lot of
We sure
conversations
have.
about this. I'll be like, wait, did I tell him that?
So
I guess I did.
so
So,
wait a minute. So, listeners, I am telling you, you are in for a treat when you start to listen to this podcast. We have shared quite a few stories, and some of her guests will share some very valuable insight. And Michele has a great way of getting that out of the guest. So I'm more than confident you'll find this one of your top rated podcasts. But Michele, please
oh.
proceed and tell us about that mirror.
Yes, I have a couple stories. Did I tell you the pantyhose story? Oh, that might sound
No.
scandalous.
Well, now that you threw it out there, Michele, you can't take that back. So it's like, oh, they cut that out. No, so go ahead
I
and tell
can't.
us about the Pennywise story. Yeah, can we talk about that? Yeah, right. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. All right. We'll talk about the pantyhose story. All right. So, probably a couple of months after I lost, I had, when you have weight loss surgery in that first month, like the weight loss is crazy. Sometimes I
Yeah.
think maybe I should just go do that again. Like,
Uh,
just do that again. But I think in the first like 4 weeks, first month, I probably lost 25 pounds, 20 to 25 pounds, which is pretty rapid, right? But
Yeah.
that's typical when you have, sleeve or bypass or whatever weight loss surgery, because the first few weeks you're just drinking liquids and you're gradually introducing your body back to solid foods. And so I needed a pair of pantyhose. And so my my son, girl he was dating at the time, we actually worked together. And so after work, I said, I really need to go stop at the store, and I need to buy a pair of pantyhose. And so she says, okay. So she used to call me Mama Michele. And anyway, so we go to the store, and I go to the rack where the pantyhose are, in the store that I normally would buy my pantyhose. And so I pick up my old size. And so she says, do you know what size those are? And I said, yeah, this is the size that I always wear. And so she goes, no, you can't wear those. And I said, yeah, sure I can. I can wear those pantyhose. And we're literally starting to have an exchange in the store. And she's like, those are too big for you. Like, you're going to have elephant hose. Like you ever see a woman when the hose are too big, and look like elephant legs at the bottom. Right. Yes. And so I was like, you're crazy. Like that. I mean, this is the size. She says, so she stops, she takes the package from me, she flips it over, and she goes, read this. And I'm like, okay. And so I read it, and my old size was like, it was like 20 pounds, the range, there's always a range. It was like 20, 30 pounds heavier. And she's like, that is not what you weigh anymore.
Yeah.
And I really had to stop. And I was like, oh, okay. And so, the end of the story is that I ended up buying the smaller pair of pantyhose, and they were absolutely fine. And it felt great. But just to talk about the cognitive dissonance that happens when you're transforming like that, because you've always believed what you've believed. You've always seen what you see. You've always experienced what you experience. And so it was almost unfathomable for me to believe that I could walk into this store, I could buy a smaller pair of pantyhose, and they actually would fit.
Yeah. Wow. But now, from our conversations, it didn't stop there. There were some other incidents. I'm going to ask you to talk about the coat incident. I'm
you want to talk about
out, Michele?
You want you just tell all my business.
I'm giving the listeners everything they need to know.
You're just telling all my business. I thought you had my back. I thought you was my ride or die.
I got your back. And you and I have talked about this. One of the things that I wanted to do with this episode, Michele, is that really to let our listeners know about how authentic you are and how transparent you are. Now while we're able to kind of giggle at these incidents now, but you and I had talked about this, and you've shared this publicly, but how really they were kind of traumatic in a way when you were going through them. And so and again, the reason why I asked you to share the next incident with the coat is that it's a process. It took you some time. Like the pantyhose was not the only incident.
No, it wasn't.
You went right back to thinking, okay, I just realized that I was buying the wrong pantyhose. Now, you would think you got over it, but then you kind of fall right back into that same rut again. So tell us about the coat incident.
Yes. I was still wearing clothes that did not fit me anymore. And so I had a purple coat that I actually loved. And so my daughter, she she comes home to visit. She lives in Atlanta, and so she had come home a couple months after I had lost the weight, and I'm still losing like a pound to two a week, so I'm like literally the incredible shrinking woman, and so she comes home.
Uh-huh.
So she comes home, and we were about to go someplace, and I put on the purple coat, and I'm very proud of my purple coat, and so she goes, "Where are you going?" And I'm like, "Well, we're going," and she goes, "Not with that on, you're not." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" So she goes, "Mom, that coat is about 3 sizes too big. Have you looked at it?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, it still fits." I'm like, "See, it zips, it's fine. It fits better than it did before." And
Yeah.
so she's like, "No." She goes, "Come outside. We're going to take a picture." She's like, "I want you to hold your arms out. You hold your arms out like this, and we're going to take a picture." And so that's what she did. And she showed it to me. And Robert, I was horrified. I was like, "Oh my God." So,
Yeah.
but do you know, I still wanted to hold on to it. I still wanted to hold on to it. I
Okay.
was like, "Well, but I said, I don't know." I said, "I don't have another coat," which I kind of did, but she's like,
I was going to say you did.
I did. I did. That was a lie. But I'm like,
Right.
"I like this coat," but I was comfortable. I
Yes.
was comfortable. And so this is what did it. She said, "Well, that's fine. If you want to look like that purple character from McDonald's," she's
Oh,
talking about Grimace. And I'm like, "Are you serious? Did you just say that to me?" And so she's like, "Yes, I did." And let me tell you, the coat came off, and I drove it down the street and put it in, because I do have enough vanity. I have enough vanity in me. I said, "Oh, wait a minute. That's going to mess up my whole diva
my,
situation. I can't look like Grimace. That's not, I can't, that's not going to work." Like
oh,
that.
do I remember those McDonald's commercials with the grimace? Oh my goodness.
I was like, I didn't know a whole lot of things, and I was still trying to get comfortable in my new skin, but I knew I didn't want to look like that. So,
So okay, so Michelle, so that's kind of getting back to, were you afraid to be not so much the new Michelle,
hmm
but was there something, did you fear something about, again, maybe being that new Michelle? The old Michelle had the more weight, but like moving into this new territory of being a thinner Michelle, was
hmm
there some fear
hmm
that was kind of lurking in the back
hmm
of your mind? And if so, tell me a little bit about that.
Boy, you're good, Robert. I think that go, when you live with obesity, you
Hmm.
yo-yo so much. You lose some weight, you regain the weight. You lose some weight, you regain the weight. So I literally had multiple sizes in my wardrobe because, I'm sharing with you
Oh,
about the coat, but it didn't really end there either. I tell you another story, but at any
okay.
rate, I got rid of the
Okay.
coat because I wasn't trying to look like that. But,
Right.
but, but I think that to your point, the fear is, what if it doesn't last? What if I
Yes.
gain the weight
Right.
again? What if
Ah,
I don't know if I'm really gonna be this size. Like
yeah.
there's this space between losing the weight and getting healthy
Hmm.
to your existence as a larger person and what that has
Yeah.
meant most of your life. So there's a space in between there that you really and nobody tells you this,
The in
that you
between.
have to
Hmm.
navigate, right? There's a
Yes.
space you have to navigate. So, we're talking about dealing with the healthcare providers, and I'm transparent about that. But also dealing with how external society sees you, how
Yes.
you see yourself. And when you look in the mirror and the person looking back at you still is not the thinner person, and you're trying to
Yeah.
reconcile who is that person, right? And so,
Wow.
I went through a period where I really struggled to give away the old clothes. And again, my daughter, who's absolutely savage, we'll have to have her on the show one day. She is savage. And so she comes for another visit, like in the spring after my surgery, because I had my surgery in December of 2017. So she comes home in the spring, and I never will forget. She says, "Come here. We're going into your closet, and we're going to pull things out, and you're going to get
Yeah.
rid of things, because you cannot keep wearing these clothes. That is not you. That is not who you're going to be, and it's time." But
Mm.
I'm sharing that to say that you need people in your life who can do that kind of reality testing with you, because it
Yeah.
really is hard to see that evolving person, to really see that, and then to believe. And this is where the emotional piece comes, the mindset to believe that you're going to sustain this, that
Yes.
it's
Yes.
going to be your new person. You're going to live in a different body, and that is
Yeah.
real. And and I think, Robert, when you talk about it was impactful when you and I had that conversation, when you told me about you worried about being really super thin, and you talked about the comic books, which we both like comic books growing up.
Yes.
And so, and I pictured, how Popeye would always be trying to drink his spinach, and because he wanted to, right, he wanted to be more like Brutus, and
Yes.
struggling with
Yes.
that, right? But and I felt like that's what you were expressing. And so I think that commonality, whether you live in a larger body, whether you live in a smaller body, that's the importance of the head work that you've got to
Yes.
invest in, right, as you're transforming. No matter
Yes.
what your situation is. We happen to be focused on obesity this season, but I I would love to, in some future seasons, really talk and delve more into the psychological aspects
Oh,
of living with this.
yes, yes. And it's the mental piece of it, Michelle. And you just mentioned, I remember in another episode, you mentioned three things. I think that may have been on our first episode that we recorded. But you talked about help me out here, the head work, the hard
Hmm.
work, and heart work. So put those in order for me. What you because you mentioned how important that is. That okay, you can lose the weight, but
Hmm.
there's some other things. There's some work that
There's
goes
some
with
work. I
that.
always,
So
I always
talk
say that
about those
living with,
three.
yeah, I was say living with this is like it's the whole mind, body, spirit connection, right? Because you got to do
Yes.
the head work, right? You got to do the heart work, and then you got to deal with the health piece of this, and that's all
Yes.
three. And if you leave any one of those things unturned, your outcome is going to be different. So you've got to
Yeah.
be willing to delve into that, because I know, and I still, in the spirit of transparency, I still
Mhm.
work on that. I still have to tell myself, like, Michelle, you have maintained almost an 80-pound weight loss for 7 years. And
Wow.
honestly,
Yeah.
yes, that's hard to do.
Wow.
That's hard to do. But
Yeah.
it's because I continue to deal with the heart. I continue to deal
Mm-hmm.
with the health. I continue to deal with my spirit. I continue to deal with all of those things, because I mean, this is not a sprint. This is a marathon. And so if you're going to have the health outcomes that you desire, you've got to work in tandem. Now, I mean, you do what you can do. There's not guarantees
Yes.
for anything in life, but the pieces that can get you to your optimal health while you're on this side involves the heart, the head, and the health and the spirit. That's really what it
Yes.
involves. And so, I do live by that.
You mentioned in one of the episodes we talked about how this has to be a holistic approach, because if you
Hmm.
treat one, like you were just mentioning, you may treat one area, but then it's the psychological piece to that. It's your diet. It's about the mind. It's about
Hmm.
really this kind of, again, this holistic approach that you are a strong advocate, and you do a lot of work in terms of policy. But I know you push the holistic, that we just don't need one thing. We
That's
need
right.
these other things to go along with that, to
Hmm.
make it successful. Because if you don't have those other supporting components, then you're just really treating it in a vacuum, and people are they're really susceptible to fall right back into that same pattern that they came from.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right. Yeah, it has to be a 360 approach, And I think the reason I go so hard in terms of my advocacy is that I'm
Oh, you
like
go
some
hard.
people.
Yeah.
I go hard.
You go hard.
I
That's
go
right.
hard. I do. I
Yes.
go hard. But the reason I do is because there's, depending on who you're talking to, it's like, oh, well, if we have nutritionists, why do we need,
Right.
lifestyle programs? If we got medication, why do I need to go talk to a nutritionist? And it's like, nah, this doesn't work that way. That's not how it works. I mean, it's really about, and you're not going to know from individual to individual, the treatment plan is going to be different. And that's why I'm
Yeah.
like, you have to have access to a whole toolbox that might involve medication. It might involve surgery. It might involve having to see a therapist. It might involve getting a trainer. I have all of the tools, and that's how I've kept
Yes.
the weight off. Okay. And so my point is that people think that it's going to be a one and done, or that
Mm.
I can do one thing and I'm not going to have to do the other, or life changes, right? And your body
Yeah.
changes. Um, you know, I'm dealing with in terms of the medicines, and I won't get into it because we got a whole episode about that.
Right.
You know, but I think that I'm not a strong responder to the Monjero, which is what I take
Ah.
right now.
Okay.
And so I'm not responding in the same way that some other people when they start to take it. Now, you would think I've had weight loss surgery, et cetera. So, okay, so this last, 50 pounds that I want to lose, it would be gone. That is not the case. And so
Mm.
what do you do? Right? You
Yeah.
still have to
Right.
continue to utilize the other tools. You still have to be able to work with your providers to say, okay, what's our strategy now? Like
Yes.
what are we going to do? Or sometimes it comes down to, Robert, accepting that your body may just be saying, listen, this is where we're at.
Yeah.
Either you're going to accept me and love me or
Right.
or we're going to
Yeah.
continue to have this battle. You know? So I mean,
Right. Right.
right?
Yeah. I
So
got you
that's
down to
how
this point.
I
Right.
got you
Right.
to this point. Like, what do you
Yes.
want from me? I mean, what do you want from me?
Exactly.
So
Mhm.
I think that that's the piece, is that we've got to be willing to understand that this is not a one size fits all
Yes.
disease. It's like, okay, well, if you eat 1,200 calories and you work out 5 times a week and you take medicine, you should lose 100 pounds. That's not how this works. It's like you might try
Right.
multiple things, and then your body may just say, like, listen, this is where I'm at. This is what I'm going to do.
Yes.
But I think the big thing is, has your health improved? And for me,
Yes.
right,
Hmm.
that's what my non-scale victories is, what keeps me going. Type 2 being in remission,
Yeah.
my joints feeling better, being off of blood pressure medication, right?
Mm.
I mean, all of those kinds of things, that's where
Yeah.
your health matters. And that's
Yes.
really should be your end game anyway. So it's not about a number on the scale, but we get so caught up because that's how we've been conditioned, is that, well, if you don't weigh this amount and your BMI is over this amount, then you must not be healthy, which is so far from the truth. That's not the truth,
Yeah.
you know, but
Wow.
but that's what we're dealing with. That's what
Yeah.
we're dealing
Well,
with.
and the episodes that we have coming up, I mean, everything that we've talked about will be addressed by some wonderful experts in the field and some policy makers and advocates in the field. So I'm really happy we were able to get them on to share their viewpoints. I will ask you this. With the show coming up, and I'll let you promo it and talk about our launch date. But with the show coming up, um, what is your what is your end goal for the listener, but also for yourself, Michelle? What will it mean to
Mm.
you, but also to the listener?
Nothing makes my heart sing more than knowing that people have been equipped with the information and education that they need to make sound decisions about their health. Nothing makes me happier. Well, my kids, my family,
Yes.
but but this is high, 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 high on my priority list, is that because I feel like when people have information, when people feel heard, when people feel seen, they feel validated, which is what my PCP was able to make me feel, which helped me to make more effective decisions, I'll say, around my health to get me to this place. That's what I want this podcast to be. I want this to be the place where people say, hey, I can hear experts, but I can also hear the authenticity that Michele brings in sharing her own story. But I also know that she cares about us. She's going to try to give us quality information and connect us to quality experts, to just quality conversations where I can
Yeah.
be a better me if I choose to, because
Yeah.
that's the other piece to this. But I think that's my goal. My goal is for Dear Healthcare Provider to be a go-to podcast, because there's a bajillion podcasts, and I am not foolish enough to think that people can't turn it off and not listen or whatever. But
Yes.
I really want it to be a place where you really feel like you can come, you can sit on the couch, and you can talk about what you need to talk about, but you can walk away empowered with some tools that you can use to make better health decisions and hopefully improve your own health outcomes or those of the folks you love. That's what I want this podcast to be. Well, I'm excited. Drum roll.
There you go. You would ask a real drummer, you know. Had I known that a drummer was coming, I would have brought a drum in here. But go ahead.
Right,
I'm
you're the
sorry.
real drummer, man. You didn't come
That's
prepared.
right.
Come on now. So I hope you'll pull up a chair, get your favorite drink, cozy up, put your ear to your ear pods, or your favorite, I don't know, speaker, whatever it is. But in your car, I really hope that you'll tune in and listen, because we've got so much great material for you and some experts that are just, I'm so honored and humbled to have them coming on. Some obesity medicine specialists. We've got policy leaders in the space. We just have a lot of good material that we're going to be releasing. And I hope to see you, hear you, that you start dropping comments once we release all of that, and that you'll, hit us up with the Dear Healthcare Provider emails and all of that kind of thing. And if you want to start following me now, because we've got some good clips that we're working on, some promos. But if you want to follow me on Instagram, I'm at Coach Tedder on Instagram, and I'm Michele Tedder on Facebook, and I'm Michele Tedder on LinkedIn. So be on the lookout, because we're going to start releasing some really cool promos, some sneak peeks at who the guests are. You don't want to miss it. It's going to blow your mind. Is it going to blow your
Yes,
mind?
indeed.
It's going to blow your mind, right, Robert? It's going to blow your mind.
Indeed, indeed. And just for purposes of clarification, it is Michele Tedder, Michele Tedder.
On there. And and now Robert and my marketing team have me getting on TikTok. So stay tuned for that, y'all.
Thank you, everybody, for listening in. Michele Tedder, as always, have a wonderful rest of the day.
You too, Robert.